Welcome to the Sony NW-A105 tutorial. In this 9-part series, we will walk through the A105 functionality. Unlike with many other A105 videos, this is not a review of the player. This is a nuts and bolts overview of what you can expect with daily use. This series will cover basic information about the player, a walkthrough of the Sony music application, the Sony DSP functionality, using third-party playback software, importing music files, DIY solutions to using the A105, and comparing the A105 to the A55. Finally, in the last chapter, I will briefly discuss my overall experience with the A105, summarizing its performance. In this initial chapter, we are going to cover basic information about the NW-A105. Here, we will talk about physical design, operating system, storage, battery life, and major features. The A105 is about 2 inches wide, 4 inches tall, and less than half an inch thick. It has a large glass touchscreen which measures 3.6 inches and has a 1280 by 720 resolution. Sony does not provide specific information about the screen brightness. However, the screen is legible in direct sunlight. The A105 is built of aluminum, plastic, and glass. It is over 3.5 ounces. The A105 has a single 3.5mm headphone jack, a USB-C data and charge port, and a micro SD card slot, all of which are on the bottom. There are no ports or buttons on the top or left side. The right side houses the power, volume, playback, and hold buttons. The power button is the topmost. The volume buttons are the largest buttons and easily found by touch alone. The 3 playback buttons are equally spaced from each other and are the smallest buttons in this area. The play-pause buttons has a small notch that you can identify by touch. The hold button is actually a switch. With it active, the playback buttons will be deactivated. However, you can still use the touchscreen and power button when the hold button is active. The A105 has a small LED at the bottom right. This will illuminate when the player is being charged and turn off when charging is complete. The A105 uses stock Android OS. The most current version as of September 2022 is version 4.06.00. If you are familiar with Android OS, then the A105's interface will be easy to navigate. Swiping down from the top will reveal the quick buttons including Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, volume, noise cancellation, ambient sound mode, auto rotate, battery saver, and airplane mode. You can edit these buttons and also access the Settings app. The pull-down menu will also provide notifications, just like any Android smartphone. The default music playback software on the A105 is Sony's Walkman Player. This is the same app that is available in the non-Android A series. Within this app, you have the same DSP options on the A105 as on the other non-Android devices. Sony Headphones Connect is also pre-installed. This will allow you to control supported Sony headphones. Sony includes 2 small apps called Noise Cancellation and Sound Adjustment. These, again, are pre-installed. The entire Google panoply of apps is also pre-installed. You can access the Google Play Store and download any app which is still supported on this version of Android OS. You can choose to install any other appropriate music playback software and streaming apps including Tidal, Spotify, and Amazon Music. You can access the Android developers tools just like on any other Android smart device. The startup time from turning the A105 on to when the OS is fully loaded is approximately 1 minute. Shutdown time is approximately 5 seconds. The A105 uses micro SD cards for storage. You should format the SD card within the A105. The A105 supports cards up to 2 terabytes. You do not need particularly fast cards. Music playback requires low bandwidth, so there is no point paying for V60 or V90 cards. The SD card slot is covered. The A105 has a built-in battery. This is not user replaceable. Sony does not provide the battery's storage capacity. In real-world use, playing FLAC music through the music playback software and generously applying DSP while connected to 32-ohm IEMs and headphones, you can expect about 4 to 5 hours of continued playback, depending on the volume. When you have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi active, this battery life is cut shorter. Recharging the battery from fully depleted to full charge takes about 5 to 6 hours. The A105 does not support wireless charging. The A105 supports Bluetooth transmission. LDAC, AAC, and aptX are available on this player. The A105 has dual-band Wi-Fi in 2.4 and 5 GHz protocols. This device will play back all forms of music. This includes MP3, FLAC, MQA, DSD, AAC, WAV, AIFF, and others. The A105 is rated to provide 35 mW at 16 ohm load. While a minuscule amount compared to many alternative DAPs, the A105 is more than capable of fully powering headphones up to 300 ohms. The Sony noise cancellation application works with only one headphone, which is Sony's IER NW-A105. There are no other headphones or IEMs that work with this feature. The sound adjustment application contains the same DSP functionality that is built into the Sony Music app. However, the sound adjustment will affect sound globally. In other words, you can apply the DSP options to any audio playback, including through YouTube, Amazon Music, and other third-party playback software. A key feature that is actually missing from the A105 is USB DAC mode. Connecting the player to a PC, Mac, iOS, or Android device via USB cable will only charge the player. The A105 cannot be used as a USB DAC. However, the USB DAC functionality is available on the other non-Android A-series players. This concludes Chapter 1 of the NW-A105 tutorial. In this chapter, we will go over the Sony Walkman Music app. This is the standard playback software pre-installed on the A105. This application is an Android version of the music app found on the non-Android A40 or A50 digital audio players. The layout, design, and aesthetics are identical between the Android and non-Android versions of the A series. In this video, we will talk about navigation and folder structure. If you have a non-Android A40 or A50 player, then the music application on the A105 will be familiar. The Walkman Music app launches within a few seconds of activation. If you insert an SD card for the first time, the application will take several moments to read the file structures and build a library. Depending on the types, size, and number of files on your SD card, this scan could take a few minutes or much longer. The top splash screen will display a number of quick access icons. At the very top are the refresh and setting icons. The refresh button will force the app to update the database. This might be useful if you add or delete files from the SD card. The settings icon will let you jump into further settings for the application or customize some of the buttons available. The next line below contains the search box. Here, you can search for songs, albums, or artists, information that the player will catalog from reading the metadata in your music files. Below the search box are the primary options for the music app. There are two pages. The first page lets you jump to all songs, see all the albums, select among artists, navigate your SD card's folder structure, view your marked favorites or bookmarks, review your created playlists, and see the most recently added music. Swipe to the left to access the second page. Here, you can navigate to tracks that are identified as high-res, organized by genre, release date, or composer, all of which is determined by the metadata of your files. Most of these items are self-explanatory. Swiping between pages is quick and lag-free. The bottom of the screen will display the last track you were playing. tapping in that area will bring the track information on top. When you are in the track screen, swipe from left to right. This will show you the songs available in the particular album or category. In other words, if you selected music by going through the All Songs list, swiping right will show you all your music tracks. Swiping from the right to the left on the track screen will take you to the Favorites tracks. This is where any and all of your favorited music will be found. You can of course move the playhead anywhere. Hold the small dot, then drag to your desired play time. A large box will display the timeline as you scroll. You can also tap the playhead to jump to any point in the timeline. Just below the timeline is a star icon. Tapping this will make the current track a favorite. Below the timeline is track information, including title and album. Tap in this area to be taken to another screen which shows other albums in your library by the same artist, and to see other songs in the current album. Tap the back arrow to go back to the previous screen. Near the bottom of the screen are the playback controls. From the track screen, swiping from the very top of the screen downwards will bring the Android settings panel. Swiping down from the top of the album art area will show you the splash screen of the music player application. The very top of the track screen also displays two small icons, a bookshelf and 3 vertical dots. Tapping the bookshelf icon will take you back to the splash screen. Tapping the 3 vertical dots will reveal a number of additional options, including accessing player settings, bookmarks, detailed track information, displaying lyrics, or delete the current track. This concludes the introduction of the Walkman Music Player navigation. We will discuss the DSP in a separate video. We will now discuss the folder structure available within the Sony Walkman Music Player application. How you transfer music onto your SD card will heavily influence the way the Walkman app performs. If, for example, your music does not contain metadata for album, artist, or lyrics, then those materials will not be available within the player. If you transfer music using the Sony desktop application and tell the desktop app to analyze music for clear audio and dynamic normalizer, then the A105 will have all that analysis transferred from the desktop app to the A105. If you do not use the Sony desktop application, then this process will take place within the A105 when you activate it. Beyond this, how you organize your music on your SD card is important. If you transfer all your music files onto the SD card without creating subfolders, then that might create quite the headache for you. If you do not have metadata, then you will be forced to navigate by title of the track alone. If, however, you are meticulous in capturing necessary metadata, then transfer your music files onto your SD card without any subfolders, and the A105 should be able to find the albums, artists, track numbers, etc. because of the metadata. There are many metadata editors online, both paid and free. There are some applications that can automatically scan and retrieve missing metadata and album artwork. You should do some research to find the application that suits you best. Some people use folders and subfolders to organize their music. You might have a main music folder. Within that music folder might be a multitude of other folders organized by album name, or by artist, or by genre, or all of these. If you organize your music in this way, then that is yet another method for you to navigate through the Sony Walkman Music Player application. Tap on the folder icon in the splash screen, and you can navigate through all of your folders and subfolders on the SD card. There does not seem to be any restriction as to how many folders you can have on an SD card, or how many subfolders within subfolders you can navigate through. The more complicated, the more time-consuming it will be for you. I would suggest organizing your music by artist, then a subfolder by album within which the relevant tracks are stored. This will limit folder structure to only 2 levels deep, making access faster. Having metadata for your albums and tracks is the quickest, easiest way to navigate any digital audio player. Not having metadata and not having folders is the least efficient method of navigating. Recall, I previously mentioned that you can create a list of favorite tracks. You cannot designate albums or folders as favorites. You also cannot create folders within the Walkman app. You cannot designate your favorite tracks to go to a specific folder on your SD card or within the internal A105 memory. For example, let's say you create a blank folder called Favorite 1, Favorite 2, or any other title on your SD card. You want to save certain tracks in one of these favorite folders on your SD card. Unfortunately, this is not possible on the Walkman app. All tracks designated as favorites will simply be marked for access in the favorite screen. They are not copied to another folder on your SD card or on the A105. You can, however, reorganize your favorite tracks within the favorites screen. This all further means that you cannot export your favorites list to your computer. In short, you can create as many folders as you want on your SD card while connected to a computer. You can organize your music within these folders in any way you please. The Sony Walkman app will let you navigate among the folders on your SD card, will let you find music based on metadata, and will allow you to designate tracks for the Favorites menu. You cannot create folders within the Walkman app. You cannot move tracks between folders on the Walkman app. This concludes our walkthrough of the Sony Walkman Music Player application. In this chapter, we will talk about the DSP options available within the Walkman Music Player application. Here, we will do an overview of how to navigate the DSP screens and what each option does. From the track screen, swiping from the bottom upwards will reveal all the built-in DSP options. This is within the Walkman Music Player application. Here, you can activate EQ. You can select among 5 presets and 2 user-customized EQ settings. This is a 10-band EQ. If you want to create your own EQ, tap the preset area, select Custom 1 or Custom 2, then tap OK. Then tap Adjust. Select various frequencies you want to modify, alter them using the plus and minus buttons, and then tap Done. You can reset the settings to flat by tapping the Flat button. There's a small toggle switch just below the Presets menu. This is the Direct Source switch. Turning Direct Source on will disable EQ. In fact, the Direct Source toggle is available in every DSP menu. Turning it on will disable all DSP, let you hear the original content without any modifications. You can swipe left or right to navigate among the 6 available DSP options screens. Swipe to the left from the EQ screen and you'll be taken to the DSEE Ultimate option. DSEE is proprietary Sony DSP. It theoretically makes low-resolution audio, such as MP3, and upscales it so that it sounds like higher-resolution audio. Sony claims that this function reproduces clear, high range. Swipe to the left again and you'll be taken to the DC phase linearizer. This supposedly makes the music sound like from an analog amplifier. The A40, A50, and A100 series have only the on or off ability with DC phase. The more premium, think costly, Sony players have Type A and Type B DC phase options. Sony has a white paper briefly discussing its DC phase linearizer. They claim to offer a subtle effect, which presents warmer and more accessible bass in the sub-bass frequencies. Swipe left from the DC phase screen and you'll be sent to the Dynamic Normalizer. This setting will analyze all your tracks and apply gain modulation so that there is minimal difference in loudness from one track to the next. Swipe left again and you'll be presented with the Vinyl Processor. Sony claims this produces rich sound that is similar to vinyl. The little concrete information available about this DSP setting indicates there is a minor emphasis in bass, apparently near the 10 Hz region, and an insertion of digital noise to mimic the type produced by record players. At least, that is what can be gleaned from a Sony article. Swipe left and you'll be taken to the Clear Audio Plus screen. This is essentially full auto mode DSP. Turn this on and the A105 will decide what effects to apply to your music. Theoretically, the player will analyze each track individually and apply the DSP it believes are most appropriate. Unfortunately, there is no information about what the A105 is programmed to believe is the best outcome for a given track. When Clear Audio is active, you cannot select any of the DSP we previously discussed. You will need to deactivate Clear Audio to perform manual DSP. The A105 has a DSP custom user preset option as well. When you are in any DSP screen, there are two icons on top. The first is the bookshelf icon we previously talked about. The other is a 3 vertical dots, indicating further menu or setting options. Clicking on these dots will present a very different set of options than what we discussed in the track screen. While in any of the DSP screens, these 3 dots will let you access the player settings, saved sound settings, and operation guide. Tapping on the saved sound settings will reveal 3 user-defined DSP settings and an option to save the current settings you have implemented. For example, if you created an EQ setting, turned on DSEE and Dynamic Normalizer, you can save these specific settings as one of the 3 DSP saved sound parameters. This might be useful if you have created a combination of DSP and EQ that you like with a given album or a series of tracks. All of these DSP options are available in the standalone Sound Adjustments application on the A105. Remember, Sound Adjustment will apply DSP to audio irrespective of what application is playing that audio. In other words, you can use Sony's DSP while listening to Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or theoretically any other application you download from the Google Play Store. This concludes the walkthrough of the Sony DSP options on the A105. In this chapter, we will briefly talk about the third-party software that can be installed on the A105. Because the A105 uses stock Android OS, you can download any supported application from the Google Play Store. The A105 has 16 GB of internal storage, but the actual amount of internal storage available for use is approximately 6.3 GB. This is the space initially available to you and onto which you can install applications. You can designate your SD card as the place to install or store application files through the Android Settings application. Follow the relevant steps online for achieving this. In this chapter, we will briefly talk about using Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, and generally the Google Play Store integration. Spotify works on the A105 just like it should work on any other mobile device. Of course, to stream music, you will need an online connection through Wi-Fi. If you download music on Spotify, then you can designate where this downloaded music is stored. If you want the music stored on your SD card, then go to the Spotify app's settings. Click on Other, then Storage. Here, you can see where the downloaded music will be stored. If Spotify has downloaded music on the internal storage and you want to move it to the SD card, you will need to perform a few steps to accomplish that. First, you can go into the storage settings on the Spotify app and assign downloaded music to be stored on the SD card. Restart the Spotify app and the downloaded music should automatically move to a folder on the SD card. If this does not work, then you will have to perform the second step. You will need to delete the cache, log out of Spotify, and close the app. Using an Android file manager, you will need to find the Spotify download folder and delete it. Then you can log back into Spotify, assign the SD card as the storage. Basically, the Spotify app on the A105 works like it does on any other Android device. There are no crashes or UI malfunctions. The app does become a little sluggish if you have multiple applications running in the background. This is due to the A105's 4GB of RAM. To circumvent this issue, close unnecessary applications. Just like with Spotify, Amazon Music downloads and installs from the Google Play Store. It functions like it does on any other Android device. If you want to download albums or tracks for offline play, you can do that. If you want this music saved on your SD card, you will need to go into the Amazon Music app's settings menu. From the splash screen, tap on the My Music icon. Go to Offline Music. If you have already downloaded music, you will need to manually delete it here. Next, go back to the splash screen. Go into the Amazon Music app's settings. Scroll to Storage Location and select New Downloads are saved on your SD card option. Once this selection is made, you can download your music again and it will save to the SD card. If you do not have music already downloaded, then you can skip the first step in this process. The Amazon Music app is stable on the A105. However, it does become a little sluggish with the increasing number of open applications. Close applications that you are not using for better performance. YouTube is already pre-installed on the A105. If not, you can download it from the Play Store. If you have internet connection, you can watch YouTube on the A105. The resolution is low and some videos play sluggishly. However, it is possible to watch YouTube on the A105. You can play videos either in vertical or horizontal mode. The YouTube application is workable on the A105, but is somewhat slow in responding to input. Not everyone will like the Sony Walkman music player. You do not need to use it. In fact, you can download any number of alternatives. This includes AIMP, Black Player, USB Audio Player Pro, hifi Music, and many others. The stability and responsiveness of each of these applications will vary. None have the built-in DSP that the Walkman app offers. However, because the A105 has the independent sound adjustment application, you can still use Sony's DSP. Just launch your music player app of choice, play your songs, then launch the sound adjustment app for DSP tuning. Also, Tidal and Qobuz are available to install on the A105. This player supports MQA decoding. This concludes our discussion of third-party software on the A105. In this chapter, we will discuss how to use an external DAC with the NW-A105. You might not have discovered this through your other research, but the A105 can output USB line out to an external USB DAC. For example, you can plug the EcoZerta ITM03 or Low2PAW S1 into the USB-C of the A105. The operation is just as easy as on any other Android smart device. Start the A105. Plug your desired USB DAC into the USB port of the A105. Wait a moment so that the devices complete their handshake. Launch your desired music playback software. Let's look at a few examples. If you plug the Zerta ITM03 into the A105, the Zerta's optical light will turn on, indicating it has connected to the Sony player. When the A105 screen turns off, the Zerta's optical light will also turn off, indicating disconnect as long as no music is playing. Launch the Walkman music player. The app will ask, "Allow music player to access Eco Audio?" Tap yes. Plug in your headphones and start playing music. Beware, however, that the initial startup volume will be at maximum. You can control volume using the physical volume buttons on the A105. You can achieve the same result while using the Low2PAW S1. When you launch the Walkman music player, it will ask, "Allow music player to access PAW S1?" Tap yes. Once again, the A105 will send full line-out signal. But because the S1 has its own independent volume adjustment, you can leave the A105 at maximum output and control volume on the S1, if you wish. When the A105's screen turns off, the USB DACs will continue to work as long as music is playing. Unfortunately, the Sony DSP does not work with USB line out. If you want to use the DSP within the Walkman app or decide to launch the sound adjustment app, you will get the notification that sound adjustment does not apply to USB audio output. Technically, you can pair Bluetooth DACs to the A105 as well. In this example, we can try to use the FIO BTR7. Pair the devices over Bluetooth, launch your preferred music playback software, and Bluetooth signal will be sent to the BTR7. You can plug your headphones into that device. However, when I tried using the BTR7 with the A105 in Bluetooth connection, there was a repetitive loud clicking sound, and no music played. I repeated this with the A55 and got the same result. If you plug the BTR7 into the A105 through USB, then the BTR7 will act as an external USB DAC. The same procedure to play music will be used with the BTR7 as it is with the Zerta and the PAW S1. The BTR7 will display whether the music is DSD or PCM, depending on the file, of course. There is no guarantee that every external DAC will work with the A105. This concludes our discussion about using external DACs with the A105. In this chapter, we will briefly discuss importing music files onto the NW-A105. You can download music directly from the web browser on the A105. Launch Google Chrome, for example, and navigate to online storage where you have music. Download that music. You can thereafter move it to a specific folder using an Android file management software. You can store all your music in the cloud, such as with Dropbox or Google's cloud storage. You can use third-party sync software, such as DriveSync, to make sure your cloud storage syncs with your offline storage on the A105. Setting up the parameters for syncing your cloud storage is not particularly difficult. However, downloading from the cloud can take a very long time. If you store many gigabytes of music in the cloud, the initial transfer process onto the A105 may take many hours. Also, there might be download errors which might prevent a file from successfully downloading. But once fully configured, cloud storage means you never have to connect the A105 to your computer to transfer music. Frankly, a wired connection to transfer music to your SD card is reliable and very fast in comparison to the cloud storage option I just described. Speaking of wired transfer, you have a few options. You can insert the SD card into the A105, then connect the A105 directly to your computer. The A105 will show as a storage device, and you can transfer files that way. Or, of course, you can take the SD card out of the A105 and plug it into an SD card reader for your computer. You can choose to transfer music manually or through the Sony desktop application. This application is called Music Center for PC, and this is only for Windows. The desktop application is not of any particular note. You can use it to play your music once you designate the music library you want the desktop application to use. This app is also what Sony recommends to transfer music to the A105 if you're using Windows. There is no reason to use the Sony desktop application instead of, say, Windows Explorer. The Sony application is slow and clunky. It offers nothing better than competing desktop players such as Foobar, MusicBee, or any number of other options. But one of the features of the A105 is the ability to create playlists. Playlist creation cannot be done on the A105 within the Walkman Music Player application. It might be possible on third-party music playback applications in Android. Instead, if you want to use the Walkman Music app and you need playlists, then you have to create playlists within Music Center and import them onto the A105 through Music Center. This means that playlists can only be created on a Windows computer, and the playlist function can only be useful to those who have Music Center managing their A105 content. Third-party Android music playback software may offer a better alternative for creating playlists and folders. In summary, you have several ways to transfer music to the A105. The most stable, reliable, and frankly quickest way is to simply transfer music onto the SD card using Windows Explorer or the Mac Finder. This concludes our discussion about importing music on the A105. In this chapter, we will talk about some DIY solutions to the NW-A105's shortcomings. We will go over solving the short battery issue, cloud storage for online sync, and getting more amplification. The A105 has a short battery life, one which lasts for about 4 to 5 hours with continual use. You cannot replace the internal battery. However, you can use an external battery bank. You can use any USB battery charging solution, and you might already have a portable battery charger at home. If, however, you want to use something more streamlined and small, you might want to consider something like the TG90 battery charger. The TG90 has the width and height of a typical credit card. The TG90 comes with a short USB-C cable pre-installed. You can mount this charger with a small patch of Velcro, strong double-sided tape, or simply a rubber band. The TG90 will provide approximately 2 additional charge cycles, giving you an additional 10 hours of playback on top of the A105's internal battery capacity. You can also add wireless charging to the A105. For about $15, you can buy a Qi charging pad that will stick onto the A105. Simply place the pad on a compatible Qi charging mat, and you can charge the A105 wirelessly. If you store your music in the cloud, then you can sync your music. There are many apps that will facilitate syncing your preferred cloud storage to your Android device. Those applications can assign specific folders on your device or SD card to where the files will be synced. A third-party music playback app can be set to find your music at that designated spot. If you are a little concerned about keeping your A105 protected, there are screen protectors and cases available to purchase. You can even buy some port covers, which will give you the option of sealing the USB and headphone jacks when not in use. While not providing weather or waterproofing, these items will mitigate dust and other particles from clogging these ports. Finally, you might be concerned about the power output of the A105. The player has 35 milliwatts at 16 ohms. This is sufficient for most headphones and IEMs up to 300 ohms impedance. The HD6XX, for example, will get quite loud with the A105, though you will need to increase volume to near maximum. The A105 has a USB line-out function. You can use an external USB DAC such as the ecozerta ITM03 or Low2PA S1 with the A105. There are probably other USB DACs that will work with the A105 as well, but there is no guarantee that all USB DACs will work. If you do not have an external USB DAC, you can use an external 3.5mm headphone amplifier. There are many portable amplifiers with a 3.5mm input, such as the Topping NX4. You can connect the A105 and one of these amps via a 3.5mm cable and essentially double amp. This concludes our discussion of the DIY solutions for some of the A105's shortcomings. The A105 is the Android version of the NW-A105. In this chapter, we will briefly compare these two devices. Both the A105 and A55 are nearly identical in size and shape. However, the devices do have noticeably different features. First, the A55 has a slightly smaller screen and one with lower resolution. The A55 has 800 by 480 resolution, while the A105 has 1280 by 720 resolution. The A55 has a proprietary Sony WM port, which looks a little bit like the old Apple 30-pin port. The A105 uses a USB-C port. The A105 has a Wi-Fi antenna. The A55 does not. The A55 can be used as a USB DAC with the NW-A105 USB conversion cable. In other words, you can connect the A55 to your computer and use it as an external DAC. The A105 has no USB DAC function like this. However, the A105 can send USB line out to an external DAC, such as the Low2PA S1, ecozerta ITM03, or even the BTR7 in USB mode. The A55 cannot do this. The A55 uses the Sony Walkman music playback software. You have no choice but to use this. The A105, being an Android device, does permit installing third-party music software. The A55's firmware can be hacked and replaced by a third-party modification labeled Mr. Walkman. The Mr. Walkman firmware will unlock some features on the A55. In some regions, Sony players have a volume limiter. the Mr. Walkman firmware will delete that software limitation. The third-party firmware will also unlock some additional DSP options only available in the higher-priced Sony players. Newer versions of the Mr. Walkman firmware allow you to dual boot the A55. This means you can have both the Mr. Walkman firmware and the more standard firmware available to you. The A105 cannot be hacked in this manner. I do not know of any software modifications that can be performed on the A105. While there are some key differences between these two devices, there are also a few key similarities. For example, the A105 and A55 have identical sound. True A/B tests clearly show there is no difference in sound quality between the two. Further, both devices have the same DSP functionality. This concludes our brief discussion about the A105 and A55. In the last 8 videos, we discussed specific aspects of the NW-A105. In this chapter, I will briefly summarize my experiences using this device for well over a year. There are clear benefits to using the A105 over the A55. If you use a third-party music service, such as Amazon Music, Spotify, Deezer, Qobuz, or Tidal, then you may want access to all your online music along with any music on your SD card. If you only have music from streaming services and do not have any local music, then the A55 and players like it are clearly not suitable for you. I have both streaming services and use my own curated local music folder. I found that the A105 gave me fairly seamless transition between Amazon Music and the music stored on the SD card. The A105 never crashed the various music playback applications I used. The A105 never froze. However, it is also obvious that the A105 is not really optimized for Android. Sometimes the user interface seems sluggish. Using multiple applications at once will decrease responsiveness. I find the A105's size rather convenient. It is built well and its physical controls are easy to navigate. I'm sure many people will complain about the lack of power for headphones, but I found that the A105, just like the A55, has plenty of amplification for lots of headphones, including the HT6XX. I thought that the Sony DSP functionality was useful. I didn't think that the MP3 upscaling rendered audibly different results, however, but the vinyl settings seemed to have a minor but audible one. The fact that I could use DSP globally, even when playing content on third-party applications, opens up more options for users, and I appreciated having this utility when listening to music on my streaming services. I was a little frustrated by a few issues with the A105. First, its short battery life. 4 to 5 hours of playback is quite short. Of course, this will depend on your headphones, the music, and the software you're running. Second, the lack of USB DAC functionality required me to carry another external DAC when I traveled. I wish I could just use the A105 with my computer. Third, Sony should have allowed Bluetooth transmission and reception. If USB DAC mode was not physically possible, then Bluetooth reception could have been. Sadly, there simply is no way of receiving audio signal from another device to the A105. Finally, the A105's slightly sluggish performance with Android was a little bit disappointing. Of course, I am spoiled by faster devices like the Samsung S8 Ultra or the LG V30. The A105 simply is not designed to compete with devices that have faster processors and more RAM. Ultimately, in my opinion, the A105 is a very good device. It has some shortcomings that might be significant for many people. It is not a device for everyone. This is the end of the NW-A105 tutorial series. Hopefully, these videos have provided you some additional information regarding this device. Day-to-day use, user interface, and performance of a digital audio player are all concerns that you might not understand until after you have bought the device. The goal of this series was to give you a glimpse of what you can and cannot do with the A105. In theory, you've now had a chance to see how Android functions on this small player, the installed applications, and some issues that might be non-negotiable items for you. If you found this series helpful, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon.